your team in regards to this particular item. So it's been moved and seconded. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 Against? Carried. Thank you so much. We'll move into item 14, ToyFitaKey, and that is on page 125, and it's to provide an update and start the 3-year review of, no, it's not around child activity. ToyFitaKey, I'll leave that with, again, I think Liz with your team and Joanna in regards to this particular one. I will move this one, and I just ask for a seconder.
I'll second it, Alfie.
Councillor Casey, so it's been put on the table now for discussion. So I'll just invite the team to take us through this particular item with a PowerPoint presentation that's on Nexus. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Joanna again will be presenting on this item. She's done all the hard mahi on this one, and I'll be here in support if there's questions following the presentation. Kia ora.
Thank you, Liz. I'm just sharing my desktop again. I hope that you can see that.
Yes, it's all there, Joanna.
Fantastic. I'll just bring up my notes. So I'm here now to present the current state findings for the review of ToyFitaKey, Auckland's Arts and Culture Strategic Plan, and to seek approval for the redevelopment of ToyFitaKey as a collective impact framework for the creative sector. ToyFitaKey was adopted by Auckland Council's governing body in 2015. It was developed in collaboration with Tamaki Makaurau's arts and culture sector, Mana Whenua and Matawaka. It was envisaged as a whole of sector plan. Since 2015, the landscape has changed. Council has the Auckland Plan 2050, and the arts and culture sector has been significantly impacted by COVID-19. The Culture and Diversity team undertook a current state report to understand if ToyFitaKey is still fit for purpose to support the social, cultural and economic well-being of Aucklanders and foster a thriving, resilient arts and culture sector that's delivering against Auckland Plan outcomes such as belonging and participation and opportunity and prosperity. Our review sought to understand what is working well within Council in the arts and culture sector and what needs improvement. To achieve this, we investigated the Council's investment into arts and culture, how this was being impacted by COVID-19 and the emergency budget, and what outcomes were being sought in regard to this investment. We also considered what's been achieved in the last 6 years and where best practice is being modelled regarding the implementation of ToyFitaKey. We collaborated with Te Taumata Toia Iwi, the Arts Regional Trust, to map the wider creative investment ecosystem for Tamaki Makaurau, tracking who the major investors are, where the investment's going, and what outcomes are being sought. We also sought to understand the arts and culture sector's views about the current issues, challenges and opportunities and what can be improved. To do this, we undertook targeted sector engagement in February 2021 and key informant interviews from February to June this year. I'm now going to take you through the findings of our current state review and our recommendations regarding next steps. And I'm just going to try and work out how to take you to the next slide. Mine appears to be stuck. There we go. Sorry about that. So this slide is just a high-level map of Tamaki Makaurau's creative sector, which is a really complex interdependent ecosystem. You can see that the ecosystem includes independent creatives and a flexible infrastructure of people and companies who come together for projects and programs. There are funded artistic and cultural institutions and funders, including Auckland Council and the CCOs, also Mana Whenua Iwi and the communities of Tamaki Makaurau. And up the top there, you can see the main functions of Auckland Council in this space around venues, programming, policy and regulation, commissioning and investment, and then some of the other functions that we have towards the outside. get to the next slide again. So the creative sector is integral to the prosperity of Tamaki Makaurau. In 2019, the sector generated 3.9 billion for our economy and employed 32,000 people, or 4% of the city's workforce. 49% of the people employed in Aotearoa's creative sector reside in Tamaki Makaurau. Design, digital media, film, video production, visual and performing arts have all shown growth in employment between 2014 to 2019, and digital media has shown the most growth in that time, 8.4%. COVID-19 has had a really significant impact on the creative sector, with a number of events being cancelled both last year and this year due to the lockdowns. There's further uncertainty continuing about whether there will be more lockdowns after the one we're currently in, how long our international borders will remain closed for inbound and outbound talent and products, and also international tourists. The Ministry for Culture and Heritage, modelled in 2020, predicted the creative sector in Aotearoa would be hit hard by COVID-19. We don't yet have the data to give a full picture of the impact of the creative sector on the creative sector in Tamaki Makaurau. Te Taumata carried out 2 surveys of the sector in 2020, however, and showed that 83% of the respondents in May 2020 reported having to cancel an event hui project or service, with 58% of survey respondents needing to cancel events in September 2020. In addition to this, there were also major, as yet unquantified financial losses stemming from the cancellation of major events, festivals at large venues, both last year and this year. The significance of this to Tamaki Makaurau is that the revenue from those large-scale commercial events are often used to cross-subsidise local works, so the knock-on effect from those losses on the creative sector may be felt for some time. We also noted that the Pacific community had been particularly impacted due to the Pacifica Festival being cancelled both in 2019 and 2020, and Polyfest in 2020, which had significant losses for the stall holders in that community. In terms of support, individual artists have been able to claim the wage subsidy, and Creative New Zealand and the Ministry for Culture and Heritage had COVID emergence relief funds available for the sector in 2020. We don't have all the data yet about how much of that came to Auckland, but we are expecting to receive that information shortly. This slide is showing the investment that is coming into the creative sector. You can see that Auckland Council is the largest investor into the sector, and in the 2018-19 financial year, 180 million was invested by Council through Council departments, grants, local boards, the cultural institutions, their RAFA-funded amenities, libraries and CCOs. By way of comparison, Creative New Zealand and the Ministry for Culture and Heritage invested 19.8 million and 33 million respectively into our region. Council's investment into arts and culture includes venues and infrastructure, festivals, programming, public art, Māori design, marae, and investment into the creative economy. Our mapping of council investment showed the most significant amounts of ratepayer investment outside of the libraries and CCOs goes to the major cultural institutions, most notably the Auckland War Memorial Museum, MOTAT, and the Auckland Regional Amenities Funding Board, who invest in the Auckland Arts Festival, the Auckland Theatre Company, Auckland Philharmonia and New Zealand Opera. These major cultural amenities play a vital role in the social, cultural and economic life of the region, and the level of investment reflects the cost to keep these regional amenities operating sustainably. However, the current governance and funding arrangements for these entities mean there is limited visibility or accountability back to Council on who is directly benefiting from this significant ratepayer investment. Given the scale of investment, Council should have mechanisms in place to better understand how this is benefiting the diversity of Auckland's communities and how it aligns with Council's strategic objectives and priorities. This next slide is around Auckland's attitudes to arts and culture. The recent New Zealanders in the Arts report, Auckland version, showed that Aucklanders recognise the value of arts in getting them through COVID-19, with 20% feeling more positively about arts for this reason. 61% of Aucklanders surveyed agreed that arts and culture make an important contribution to community resilience and well-being. Young people in particular recognise that participation in arts is good for their well-being. And nearly 70% of Aucklanders surveyed agreed that they learnt about different cultures through the arts, with young people, Māori, Pacific and Asian New Zealanders agreeing that arts are an important way to connect with their culture. There is also increasing support for public funding of arts and culture, which you can see on this slide has risen from 53% in 2017 to 60% in 2020. And particularly support for council giving money to arts has risen from 48% to 53% in 2020. There's agreement within Auckland Council about the importance of ToyFitaKey. It's been used to drive work programs and has had a tangible impact on the funding and programming. A stocktake of Council's investment and activity highlighted there's a range of work that's been driven by and aligned to ToyFitaKey's goals. And examples of this are alignment of our regional and local board funding, an expanded Matariki Festival, the annual Tamaki Hiringa Waka Festival, opening of the Waterfront Theatre, and the funding of Toi Tu Toi Ora at the Auckland Art Gallery. Auckland's also achieved the UNESCO City of Music status, and there's been a greater visibility of Māori identity and design across the city. These examples that I've just mentioned and others of good practice are included as case studies in Appendix 1 of the current state report, if you would like to have a look in more depth at that. To inform our review of ToyFitaKey, as well as speaking to our operational teams, we spoke to our external stakeholders. In February 2021, we held a hui targeted at diverse thought leaders in the arts and culture sector, which you can see listed on the right-hand side of that slide. The hui included independent creatives and representatives from a range of smaller community-based organisations. We also carried out 21 key informant interviews with leaders of Tamaki Makaurau's major cultural institutions, leaders from the Arafa amenities, including the orchestra, the theatre, the opera, and some of our arts facilities partners, leaders from our CCOs and our internal experts. We asked all of them, what are the key issues, challenges, strengths and opportunities facing the arts and culture sector in Tamaki Makaurau? What are your aspirations for the future and what is required to get there? And what is required to make ToyFitaKey relevant and fit for purpose for that future? We took their feedback, analysed it and used it to inform the recommendations we're making today. There were broad themes which emerged from the engagement, and you can read about those in more depth from paragraph 172 of the report and also in Appendix 4 and Appendix 5. At a high level, the sector said they would like to see more leadership and collaboration from council, the government and across the arts sector. Sustainable funding was a really big issue, and for independent artists and smaller organisations, there was support for greater equity and diversity in the funding ecosystem. There was support for a greater reflection of Te Resi principles in Te Ao Māori in the funding, strategy, governance and programming of the arts and culture sector, and also a strong call for the strategy to link to and drive council investment. We also got feedback that in broad terms, ToyFitaKey has been seen as really positive in terms of aspirations for the sector, in its goals. Our arts facilities partners in particular had the most praise for the strategy and have been using it to create goals and KPIs for their organisations. However, the feedback was that it hasn't achieved its intent of being a sector-wide plan, and there was a great deal of frustration expressed that council investment, for example the LTP process, has no link to ToyFitaKey. Our stakeholders want to see investment linked to and our strategy linked to and driving our investment. There was also similar feedback to that which I've just mentioned, that ToyFitaKey needs to have a Te Ao Māori worldview at its centre and more focus on tiriti principles. There was a clear message that there needs to be leadership from council in policy, operations and at a governance level to drive the strategy and keep it alive. There also need to be better ways to evaluate whether it's delivering public value for Aucklanders, delivering against the Auckland Plan outcomes, and what impact it's actually having on the ground. So our analysis is that ToyFitaKey has been a traditional strategy of approach of aspirations followed by actions with little in between. There's no logic, intervention or mechanisms that connect the aspirations with investment or hold council or council funded entities accountable. At a fundamental level, it's lacked some core components that are needed to successfully drive collective impact and common purpose, including adequate ongoing resourcing to bring the sector together, visible and active leadership to drive and champion it, investment tools and mechanisms to create accountability. So we conclude that in its current form, ToyFitaKey is no longer fit for purpose. A fresh approach is required to address the current challenges and issues facing the sector and to create equity in the creative ecosystem and deliver greater public value for Aucklanders. We recommend that ToyFitaKey is reimagined as a collective impact framework to move from the current state to a desirable future state, which sees a thriving, sustainable creative sector delivering social, cultural and economic well-being for all Aucklanders. We propose that the collective impact approach shift the strategy from a document to a living and broader strategic framework for the creative ecosystem with multiple reinforcing components, including a common purpose, that's the shared vision and outcomes, focusing on creating public value. Key shifts, so what big changes are needed to address the key issues and deliver systemic change. Investment tools, so investment maps and performance indicators to connect investment to outcomes, priorities and public value. And programs of work that deliver inputs and outputs linked to these outcomes and indicators. We're proposing that the next phase of work on ToyFitaKey should focus on 3 key shifts: creating public value and impact linked to investment and accountability, embedding Te Tiriti principles in Te Ao Māori more visibly, creating fairness, equity and diversity within the creative ecosystem. And we're proposing that if the committee adopts this recommendation to redevelop ToyFitaKey today, we will scope the next phase, including the process and the timelines for sector engagement and co-design, and report back to the committee with an update in early 2022. The process will include actions and steps set out in paragraph 81 of the covering report, and will include designing a process of engagement or co-design, which will include mana whenua, a broad cross-section of the arts and culture sector, including Māori and Pacifica artists, Aucklanders with an interest in arts and culture, and of course our council entities, including the local boards, the Kaitiaki Forum, advisory panels, operational staff, and our council-controlled organisations. Thank you for listening to my presentation, which is a bit longer than we would usually speak for, but it's such a vast amount of information that I wanted to make sure that we covered off some of the key points, and I'm happy to take any questions now in regard to that.
Joanna, thank you so much for the report. Yes, yes, I agree. It's actually quite long, but it's actually relevant, and it had to be there, and the length it is because of the work that the team has done. So look, I just wanted to acknowledge you in regards to this. So look, I've got two partai at the moment. So I've got firstly Councillor Bartley and then Councillor Coombe.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this report. I wanted to know, how will we go about putting this through to the LTP? Because how did we not include this in the current LTP? Just like how we've done with the Climate Action Plan, we weren't given an opportunity to have a look at something to put it through for LTP. But we all know how important arts is, especially in terms of COVID recovery, that it isn't just about buildings and built infrastructure. It is about this social infrastructure of our arts and cultural sector. So I'm just keen to know how we put some priority behind this, and maybe that might help when you go back out there to the sector.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley. Really good question, and that is the big challenge that we have ahead of us with this reimagining of the plan is how do we intentionally link what we're saying is what we're trying to achieve with where the investment goes. So we need to be learning from the climate change plan and how that was achieved, and working with our senior leadership team and our finance team to join the dots on that. So that strategy really does drive where investment is going and what mechanisms need to be in place to do that. We imagine with this new reimagined plan that there will be investment tools that we develop that supports that. So rather than just being a document, it has a range of kind of reinforcing components, which could include investment logic maps and processes that ensure that when we make investment in others, we also have tools to ensure accountability back for that investment in really clear ways. So I think it's going to be a combination of all of those things.
Oh, excellent. Okay, thank you. And I also like how you're going to the smaller groups and the groups that aren't the normal big players out there that we traditionally have always gone through. So really appreciating how you're keeping it diverse, you know, going to a number of groups.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Bartley, can I just add here as well, is that when this was developed, ToyFitaKey was developed, there was a push in regards to putting it in to the LTP because we knew there had to be some alignment with resources and financial resources, but that never was supported. That's why I know that moving forward in regards to this is going to be important with Councillor Simpson and Henderson's committee moving forward, as well as Bishop the Mayor. But that was always identified as crucial when it was first launched, I think way back in 2015, I think. But look, we understood that, but there was just no appetite at the time. So look, I thank you for the questions because that's exactly what we need to end up doing. I'm going to move to Councillor Coombe, then Fletcher, and then Hills.
Tēnā koe matua Alf, ngā mihi mahana kia koutou katoa.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, ngā mihi. Thank you for all this work, and I'm very happy to support what's recommended. I just have a query in regards to the climate impact statement at paragraph 82. It is very lacking and a very narrow view of what the cultural sector can do to support our goals from our climate plan. So my question is if there's some acknowledgement that perhaps that needs a whole rethinking and looked at in terms of the same way that we approach the Māori impact statement. Is there going to be the opportunity, if we approve the recommendations, and we work through the actions to actually revisit that as we develop this new framework.
Thank you.
And I'm just sort of thinking about how it just needs, there's a lot of resources and people who can assist with that, but it just needs to be a much broader view.
Thank you, Councillor Coombe, and you're right. I guess probably the way that we responded to that statement was from this decision there was no immediate climate change impact, but you're right, the arts have a potentially really powerful role to play in supporting climate change initiatives and environmental sustainability. So going forward, the opportunity for us to be able to explore that further through the strategy is absolutely right. So I think just for this covering report, we were thinking more of the decision about whether we proceed with doing a reimagining of ToyFitaKey didn't necessarily have a climate change impact, but downstream, a strategy and investing in arts and culture to deliver across the broad four well-beings of our communities. Absolutely.
And I would just add to that, some of the stakeholders in our major cultural institutions have that very much at front of mind, and several of them mentioned that they wanted to work together collectively around reducing the climate impact that their organisations are having in Tāmaki Makaurau.
Oh, kia ora koroa. Thank you for that. And I guess as a plea through the chair, just in terms of the authorisers of reports that come to us, that the way that the climate impact statement has been approached for this report is not what is intended from that statement. It's not about us, the decision we are making today and whether we're having an impact as we make the decision. It's about looking at the piece of work and the ongoing impact. And I just think that the way in which the Māori impact statements have evolved really give us a template in terms of the analysis and thinking that needs to be applied. So I just wanted to throw that in, Chair Alf, and I'm very happy to support. Don't need to comment further. Kia ora.
Ka pai. Councillor Fletcher, and then Councillor Hills, and then Darby.
Kia ora. This is a magnificent piece of work and really comprehensive, so thank you so much, Joanna and Liz. Back in 2015, I was perhaps a bit concerned that we were never going to be able to implement our strategies unless we saw some legislative change, that there are so many roadblocks around the accountabilities that we seek on this, and I totally support the pathway that you're putting to us today. But I can see that unless we can get advocacy to central government on some of the legislative changes with the funding, with ARAFA, with the cultural institutions and so forth, we might not be in a situation to meet our community's expectations of us and to be accountable. It's so encouraging to see the growing support from the public on the importance of arts, particularly in a world of COVID, where it impacts on how we might see the future and how it will impact on our mental health and in every which way. But I, again, just would like your feedback as to how effective we might be unless we can engage central government in getting these legislative changes, because while ARAFA was fit for purpose in 2007, I don't believe it's fit for purpose in 2021, and just would like your feedback on that. Thanks.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor Fletcher. And you absolutely have identified a key challenge. And I guess there's probably two responses I'd make to this. One is, we will be working quite closely with central government, the Ministry of Culture and Heritage and Creative New Zealand on a range of fronts in terms of sort of the national strategy picture. But I think there's also opportunity to achieve some of this through relationships and brokering. I know, for example, the ARAFA Funding Board are very interested and we're very open to having the investment they make through their entities a link to ToyFitaKey. It just requires council to ask them to do that through the funding principles. So I think there are mechanisms and relationships we can work on to achieve to ensure that the investment we're making through those entities are delivering the outcomes that we see are important to Aucklanders. So I think there's sort of both working with the Coalition of the Willing and relationships to do that. The Arafa board are also open to, potentially if council was again up for this, extending their brief to include other regional cultural infrastructure that might well be not currently in the mix there, but would meet the threshold for that. So if we can't get rid of the legislation, how can we ensure it's providing greater equity into the system? So that's an alternative option that could be looked at. All of these things can be explored in this next phase of work. So those are kind of the immediate things I would say. Also, what I would reflect on is that when we talk to all of these cultural institutions, the big ones that are funded through legislation, they were all really passionate about trying to deliver value for Aucklanders. It's just some of the mechanisms by which we can understand that seem to be lacking. So I think there is willingness and starting out with an intent of trying to add value and all on the same page around that common purpose of delivering public value for Aucklanders is the starting point. So I hope that's kind of answered your question. I mean, I can't necessarily speak to whether we can get central government to change legislation, but we're certainly up for the conversation.
Well, where there's a will, there's a way. I really applaud you again for the work that you've undertaken. I don't think it should hamstring us, but I think we should also keep that dialogue going with central government to get that legislative change if we possibly can, because it's so important to our future.
Kia ora. So we've got two more partai and then I'll open it up for comments. So Councillor Hills and Darby.
Kia ora, Chair, and thank you to the staff. It's a huge body of work and important one. My concern maybe is broader than the report maybe, but it's related to content of the report, just on what we can do and how much ramped up support we could do for our arts sector through COVID with these new level 2 restrictions obviously needed because of Delta, but the issue is going to be that could last for a while, and potentially when we start opening up next year we may need similar restrictions on us as a backup from the vaccines. We aren't sure what is being done in the space of advocacy and how can we ramp that up, because I'm really concerned we could lose some venues, we could lose some artists overseas and things like that. How can we get more from government or be more, is there flexibility in the way we are enabling the use of our Test Square or different spaces outside? Is there thinking being done in that space? Because I'm concerned that we could, a couple more months for some of those areas could be bad for the whole city and the hotels and hospitality that comes with the arts as well.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. Really good question. And there is some thinking being done on this right now. In fact, there's some advocacy that the sector itself is making to central government about the need for more emergency and funding. Last year, the Ministry of Culture and Heritage put quite a significant amount of investment into supporting recovery for the sector. There's not been any new announcements this time around. Creative New Zealand got significantly more money to support with emergency grants for last year. At this stage, they're saying they don't have any new investment other than their existing programs. So, and as you're absolutely right to point out, Delta is a game changer because in level 2, it's not the same as it was in level 2 last time round, with increased distances you need to have. So I think this is something that people in the sector are absolutely grappling with. It is a real live issue. I'm not saying everyone's got solutions, but they are thinking about it and talking with government about what is possible in terms of new additional funding into the system. And I think the sector also looking at itself and going, if this is going to be the reality of living with pandemics potentially for some time to come, and particularly challenging ones like Delta, do we need to reimagine the way the live performing arts and events industry works? So one of the things that some are saying is, how do we absolutely upskill our digital capability so we can reach audiences and engage audiences in that way much more successfully? but that doesn't get around, the fact that people love to go to see live events in person with others. And how does that future look like in that, when we may be living with something like Delta for some time to come? So look, I don't have answers, but there are people definitely thinking about it, and that's one of the opportunities our strategy, when we reimagine it, could look at as well. How does the arts and culture sector need to evolve if this is our new reality?
Kia ora, thank you very much.
Liz, I know we spoke about, before I go to Councillor Darby, I know we spoke about the word new and putting whether it be reimagined ToyFitaKey or a redevelopment or whatever. So can you just have a look at that? Also, and Councillor Darby can cover off on what he's put in the sidebar in regards to adding to B. So Councillor Darby, I personally don't have any issues in regards to B, but in putting in 80 and 81. Can I just say the only reason we've had the 81 put in there instead of 79 is that the original numbering that gave us the recommendations, the current ones we see in front of us, was wrong, and that's why the 81. So Liz, I'll be interested to have get your thoughts, you and Joanna, on furthering from what Councillor Darby is talking about, further endorse the 3 key shifts. I'm of the mind that got no problems adding it, as in approve the associated action steps to produce a reimagined or whatever ToyFitaKey, because ToyFitaKey should be still there. So look, those are my questions to you, Liz and Joanna, to have a thought as Councillor Darby asked this question based on his sidebar comment. Councillor Darby.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And look, great report, great work. I really appreciate this, and thank you to all involved. Look, just a brief point. I actually think those 3 key shifts are very important to acknowledge and to actually get behind and be seen to and be endorsing. So they are somewhat reflected in paragraph 81, but I think endorsing those up front is, a real strong political message that we are about, value and accountability. We are about the treaty, but we're also reinforcing the need for equity and diversity. And then 81 falls out of that. So brief comment on just that possible small change, but important change to acknowledge 80 in the recommendations, Liz.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. Absolutely, we would totally support that. We do see those as the 3 key things that this next phase of work has to address and to look at. So we would completely endorse and support that amendment.
Thank you.
So it's an addition, just so then we don't get confused with amendments and everything else. It's an addition to B.
If I could just say, Chair, it might be the other way around, that you endorse the shifts and then the key actions, because it's the shifts that then allow the actions rather than the way it's written there at the moment. But I'll let you tidy it up.
Yep, so if we could get that done, at least it's still going to be an addition instead of an amendment to this. So Maya, can you and Sandra have a look at that as we go through to Councillor Walker? So Councillor Walker, Pata, your question, please.
Sure. So I'm looking at the strategy and what we're doing going forward, and my question is really just around some clarity as to what things look like as far as the strategy is concerned. So effectively, we've got a strategy that's a strategy for Auckland, of which council is apart, and quite obviously, while we can have some monitoring and evaluation against those things that council fund and leverage, our ability to monitor and and evaluate beyond that is complicated, because we don't have a financial interest. If we look at the overall arts area, quite obviously there's a substantial amount that's occurring in the commercial sector. There's a substantial amount that's occurring in the non-governmental sector. We've got things that are occurring directly as a consequence of council across council-controlled organisations and council itself. We've obviously got the involvement of Creative New Zealand.
Yeah.
So just in terms of clarity, is it possible to have a process that's fairly open and dynamic, that might be web-based, so that it's possible to build up and populate things around input from a whole variety of organisations, of which council is part? So my question is just around how we deal with that, because it's not obvious to me from the report that I'm reading.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. So we are talking about a collective impact model, which means we recognise that it is not just what council can do, but that the collective mahi of a whole range of players within a sector is what's critical to achieving whatever the shared purpose or vision is for that sector. So we understand it's quite a complex set of relationships and players that are in any given system. But there's a couple of things I would note. So firstly, that's the approach we want to take, that actually people in the system see the value in having a collective impact approach to the strategy, so that they all see the part they play. And so, yes, you're right, council can't necessarily hold organisations or entities that we don't invest in to account. But actually, as you've seen from the investment mapping, we put a lot of money into the system through one mechanism or another, one way or another. So we actually have quite a lot of interest in lots of different parts of the system. So I think we have got some sort of key levers to pull there. And then I think your idea around something potentially being on live, or reimagining this as being not just about a document, but something that is much more living, is absolutely what we'd be interested in looking at with the range of players in the sector. So yes, that's absolutely possible. And it might well be that this strategy, again, rather than being just a paper document that's published and looks pretty, it could have a range of components that are almost they hang from the framework. So, and it might be there's an outcome and vision part, there's the investment tools part that can be developed in parallel but independently almost, or connected, but not requiring us to do everything before we bring things back to the council to have a look at. So there's, I think, a different way that we could be doing this that we haven't done before, and we want to learn.
So my follow-up question to that, given that we need to take a collective approach, and it may well be that there are many players out there that don't necessarily receive a lot of funding from council, or that council's funding in the scheme of things may not be the majority of their funding, and we shouldn't be seen to be limiting arts and culture through this strategy. How then do we develop that collective approach very laterally and dynamically? And are you resourced for that? Because effectively it means building a resource in part that's outside of council.
Yes, potentially. So that is the challenge of the sort of scoping phase, that we're going to look at how can we do that, and how do we imagine that and design that with the interested parts of the sector. So there will be a sense that this is kind of the coalition of the willing. So those parts of the sector that are really not interested, I guess, you know, we can't make them be part of it if we're not putting any putia into their operations. But I think there is, what we've heard through the stakeholders we've spoken to is that they do see the value in coming around a shared purpose, but it does rely on leadership. It relies on backbone organisations like Auckland Council holding a lot of the holding the space for all of those parties to come together. And that's something we didn't do very well last time. We certainly did it within the immediate council family, but less well with the sector. So that does have resourcing implications. And as a policy team, we have much more seen as part of our role to do that on an ongoing basis. So, and working with some key partners, so the likes of Te Taumata Toia Iwi, which is the Arts Regional Trust, who have a similar interest in bringing the sector together to support collaboration around a common purpose. So, I guess,
So the follow-on question I've got, given that our track record is that we haven't had the resource in the past to develop this collective approach, and I would suggest it does require more resource, is that resource possible?
We certainly think it's possible to develop the strategy within our existing resources. And if we find that the ongoing coordination of implementation requires other additional resource, we would bring that back to Council's attention and for your decision to make whether that's something you choose to do. But we also see as an opportunity, given the other investors into the region, so Creative New Zealand, the Minister of Culture and Heritage, Te Taumata, the CCOs as part of Council's extended family, that actually we can leverage resources there as well. It doesn't have to be all on, the policy team's shoulders to do that. We can actually work. We've got those other parties ready to, to be part of something like this, keen to be part of it and keen to bring their resource and efforts to the table as well. So, I'm hoping that we can leverage as well as not assume it's all on council.
Yeah, so look, that work is still to be done. And as I said earlier, and acknowledging Councillors Simpson and Henderson in regards to their Finance and Performance Committee, as well as His Worship the Mayor, that is the piece of work that will come back to us and come back to the PACE Committee. So look, there doesn't appear to be any more partai, so I'm going to open it up for comments. The 3-second rule will apply. Councillor Casey, are you happy with the addition that we have for B in red? And I like the reimagined instead of new, because ToyFitaKey is still going to be the name of the document moving forward. So
all good, Alfie.
okay then. So look, the 3-second rule is gone. So I'm going to put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Before I finish it off, Councillor Walker, you've got a comment. Can you make that short, please, and then we can move on, because I will be looking at a break after this.
Yes, I mean, just very quickly, we're not inventing this wheel in this space as far as other cities are concerned. So I'd make the suggestion that we look at what other cities are doing in this space, particularly cities that have been very successful around promoting and engaging with arts and culture across a very wide sector. And there may well be some templates that we could use. I'd certainly like to be informed around what other cities have done successfully in this space, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll finish off the recommendation. All those against? None? Carried. Look, if we have a break for now, I'm in your hands. To everybody online, I'm in your hands in regards to where we go from this, because obviously we do need a break for lunch, so we can have that now and come back in half an hour, or 10-minute break, and then try and get through the rest of the agenda, and then that would have the afternoon free for everybody. So I'm in your hands in regards to any suggestions you have. So we either have a half an hour break now for lunch, or we have a 10-minute break, and then we'll come through to complete the agenda. So I'm open to everybody here. Okay, look.
Back 12:45 would be good.
Yeah, look. Okay.